Glendale, California. Friday, May 13th, 2016. Sycamore Avenue was quiet that evening, just like any other day. The late sun stretched across the neatly trimmed lawns, children's laughter echoing faintly from across the street. At number 412, 4-year-old Sophia Miller sat on the driveway, drawing with chalk, glancing back at her mother through the kitchen window with a smile. Minutes later, when her father arrived home, the chalk drawings were still there. But Sophia was gone. No trace. No explanation. 2 years later, in an abandoned restroom deep in the Angelesnationalforest, a maintenance worker found a bundle of soaked children's clothing. The faded pink sweatshirt still bore a small white-stitched repair on the cuff, a tiny, unmistakable detail. That was the moment this case, long thought cold, suddenly came roaring back to life. Glendale, California. Friday, May 13th, 2016. That afternoon, Sycamore Avenue basked in the gentle spring sunlight of Southern California. On the driveway of house number 412, chalk drawings covered the concrete, marked by the tiny hands of a 4-year-old girl named Sophia Miller. Jennifer, her mother, stood in the kitchen preparing dinner, glancing out the window from time to check on her daughter. Everything felt so ordinary that no one could have imagined it would be the last time they saw the little girl outside her own home. Less than 20 minutes later, David Miller pulled into the driveway, just like any other day. He noticed the fresh chalk lines still bright under the sun, but the driveway itself was empty. Sophia was gone. At first, he thought little of it, walking inside to ask his wife. Jennifer froze, then hurried outside to check. She circled to the backyard, swings, sandpit, hedges, all silent. Her name was called again and again down the quiet street, but only the faint rustle of grass and the sound of neighbors' doors creaking open answered back. No one had seen anything, except for one man who mentioned a white work van passing slowly by a few minutes earlier. The 911 call was made at 5:35 p.m. Within 10 minutes, red and blue lights flashed at both ends of Sycamore Avenue. Police cordoned off the area, took statements from the parents and neighbors. Young officers crouched over the concrete, photographing the chalk marks and the tiny shoe prints as if they were crucial evidence. When Detective Marcus Delgado arrived, his eyes swept over the lawn, the chalk, the white van described by a neighbor, and finally the parents, shaking in fear. One look told him, this was no runaway child. Within the hour, search dogs were brought in, following Sophia's scent from a sock taken from her bedroom. The trail led straight to the edge of the street, and stopped abruptly. The dogs circled, then looked up, confused. The scent ended there, as though she'd been lifted from the ground and vanished. That night, Sycamore Avenue glowed with the flashing lights of patrol cars. Radios crackled, uniformed officers moved up and down the block, flashlights probed bushes and fence lines. Flyers with Sophia's photo were printed and taped to utility poles, squad car windows, and pressed into the hands of volunteers. By dawn, not a single trace of the little girl had been found. The chalk on the driveway had already begun to blur in the damp night air. And from that night on, 412 Sycamore was never just another house again. In the days that followed, Sycamore Avenue was no longer a peaceful neighborhood. Police lights flashed through the night. Neighbors gathered in hushed clusters, avoiding each other's eyes as they passed number 412. Jennifer and David Miller stood wordless on their front steps, watching as flyers with their daughter's face, wide blue eyes, and an innocent smile were plastered across the city like a quiet, desperate plea. During the first week, hope still lingered. Hundreds of calls came through the tip line. One truck driver claimed to have seen a blonde girl in a pink sweatshirt at a rest stop near the California border. Police mobilized immediately, reviewed footage, and scoured the area. But the girl in the video was someone else. The hope that had briefly flared was extinguished, leaving only a deeper chill behind. In the following weeks, no substantial leads emerged. The white van seen by a neighbor led nowhere. Dozens of similar vehicles were stopped and cleared one by one. After 3 weeks, the large-scale search officially ended. The mobile command post packed up, the media left Sycamore Avenue, and the faded flyers flapped alone in the wind. House number 412 slowly became a museum of grief. Sophia's bedroom remained untouched. Stuffed animals neatly lined up on her bed, childish drawings still taped to the walls. Jennifer often stood in the doorway, but couldn't bring herself to step inside. David returned to work, but his voice grew quiet, his eyes dim, as if he'd left a part of himself behind on that driveway. Dinner was silent now. They lived next to each other like strangers, bound only by one thing, the determination to keep Sophia's memory alive. Jennifer started a website and a Facebook page, posting her daughter's photo and pleading for help every day. On Sophia's 5th birthday, and then her 6th, she posted the same picture, Sophia in her pink sweatshirt, smiling at the camera, with the same caption, "2 years without your smile. We'll never stop looking." While police were forced to prioritize newer cases, Sophia's story faded into cold corners of the internet. On forums dedicated to unsolved mysteries, strangers debated the 20-minute window, speculated whether the abductor had been a passerby or someone who knew the family. But for Jennifer and David, those weren't harmless theories. Each post felt like a blade twisting deeper. At night, they lay awake replaying faces of deliverymen, neighbors, distant relatives, silently wondering, was it him? And then, on a spring morning in 2018, just as Jennifer was replacing the latest stack of sun-bleached flyers with fresh ones, a call came into the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Office. The caller was a maintenance worker named Miguel Alvarez. His voice trembled as he described what he'd just pulled from a clogged toilet in an abandoned restroom deep in the Angeles forest, a bundle of soaked children's clothes, including a faded pink sweatshirt, with a small white-stitched repair on the cuff. In that instant, the silence of 2 years came to an end. The case of Sophia Miller erupted back to life, louder and more urgent than ever. The call from Miguel Alvarez was logged at 8:42 a.m., April 17, 2018. He was a longtime maintenance worker for the Los Angeles County Parks Department, used to spending his days alone, driving dusty service roads and tending to forgotten restrooms deep in the Angeles forest. But what he saw that morning was unlike any other mess he'd ever cleaned up. The restroom sat miles from the nearest highway, half swallowed by overgrowth and vines. Alvarez arrived as scheduled, intending to clear a backed-up drain that had been reported months earlier. As he worked, he pulled from the pipes a sodden, filthy bundle of fabric. At first, it just looked like trash. Then he noticed it was children's clothing, a faded pink sweatshirt, a pair of small shorts, and a piece of underwear. What made him stop and stare was the tiny, white-stitched repair on the cuff of the sweatshirt. That detail tugged at something in his memory, an image he couldn't quite place. He didn't remember the name, but he remembered the face. A little girl, a news story, a pink sweatshirt, 2 years ago. He couldn't mistake it. Alvarez carefully bagged the bundle, then called the sheriff's office. Later that day, a patrol team arrived to collect the evidence, seal the scene, and document every inch of the crumbling concrete restroom. When the first photos reached the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Office, where Detective Marcus Delgado now worked after leaving Glendale PD, he stood up as soon as he saw them. He didn't need to check the case file. The white stitching on the pink sweatshirt was the same detail Sophia's mother had once mentioned during the very first interview, a repair Jennifer had sewn herself after her daughter tore it on a playground fence. That afternoon, Delgado drove back to Glendale, to the once bright but now cold and quiet house on Sycamore Avenue. Jennifer opened the door, her hands gripping the frame, her face pale. Delgado didn't have to say much. He placed a thin folder on the living room table, with photographs inside, the sweatshirt, the shorts, the underwear. Jennifer recognized them instantly. Her hands trembled, her eyes welled up. David stood behind her, rigid and silent. They knew. For Delgado, the moment was both hope and dread. Hope, because there was finally a real lead after 2 years of nothing. Dread, because he understood what it meant. The person who'd gone back into the forest to hide the clothes still had something to hide. The next day, Sophia Miller's case was officially reopened. A special task force was formed, bringing in forensic experts, profilers, and investigators. Every file was reopened, every witness re-interviewed, every dismissed suspect added back to the list. From a bundle of dirty, wet clothing pulled from a clogged toilet, an entire manhunt was set in motion. And this time, Delgado swore to himself he would not stop. Not until the name of the person who shattered the Miller family's life was written into the record as a convicted criminal. That night in Glendale, flyers of Sophia went up again. Her smiling face appeared beneath a bold red headline. Case reopened. When Sophia Miller's case was reopened, the atmosphere inside the task force office shifted. This time, there were no more sympathetic glances at grieving parents, no more vague theories from online forums. Delgado wanted only one thing: results. Every old file was pulled from storage and stacked thick on the table. Every report, every handwritten note was examined under the harsh fluorescent lights. The list of people interviewed in 2016 was recreated as a massive board on the wall, each name pinned with a photo. Cleared, verified, recheck. Late on the third night, Delgado stopped. In his hands was a thin, yellowed report, handwritten notes from a young patrol officer 2 years earlier, recording a brief interview with a neighbor named Anthony Reyes. Reyes had lived just 3 blocks from the Millers at the time. He was quiet, working odd repair jobs, with a minor trespassing record from years before, but no history of violence. During his original interview, he'd been nervous, evasive, and unable to provide a clear alibi for the window of time Sophia disappeared. But with no direct evidence, he'd been dismissed after just 1 round of questioning. Delgado tapped his keyboard to pull up the most current records. Reyes had moved out of Glendale 6 months after the abduction and was now living in a dusty, desolate town near the Mojave Desert. But one detail stood out. According to property records, Reyes had inherited from his grandparents a small, dilapidated cabin deep in the Angeles forest, less than 5 miles from the restroom where the bundle of clothes had been found. Delgado didn't hesitate. Every resource shifted focus to Anthony Reyes. The next morning, a surveillance team was dispatched to the desert town. Reyes still lived alone, in a rundown rental, working as a handyman at a roadside motel, barely interacting with anyone, just as before. At the same time, Delgado led another team up into the forest to the cabin. The road in was narrow, rugged, flanked by overgrowth. The structure appeared after a sharp turn. A weathered gray log cabin with a rusted tin roof and boarded-up windows. Inside, the air was thick with dust and mildew. Broken furniture lay scattered, an old oil lamp on its side. The team spread out, methodically checking every inch. One young investigator, recalling Reyes's background as a handyman, crouched to inspect the floorboards. In the far corner of the bedroom, a loose board gave way with little effort, revealing a shallow, dark space below. In the beam of his flashlight, something small gleamed in the dirt, a white plastic hair clip shaped like a cat. Delgado crouched and stared at it for a long moment. He knew immediately this was something that could change everything. That night, Delgado drove back to Glendale and laid a photo of the clip in front of Jennifer Miller. She didn't speak for a few seconds, then nodded faintly, her voice cracking. "Yes," she whispered. "That was Sophia's. It had been her favorite." Finally, after 2 years of silence, Anthony Reyes was no longer just another name on a list. And in Delgado's mind, this time, he wouldn't get away. Once the hair clip was confirmed to be Sophia's, everything moved quickly. Delgado met with the district attorney to present the new file, each detail now fitting into a chilling chain. Reyes had lived near the scene, had no alibi, abruptly moved away after the abduction, owned a cabin just miles from where the clothes were found, and hid the clip beneath the floorboards. On April 22, 2018, at 6 a.m., 2 unmarked cars pulled up outside Reyes's rented house in the desert town. The morning air was pale with fog, the streets empty. 4 plainclothes officers stepped out, fanning out to block both ends of the street. Reyes walked out of the house like any other day, wearing worn jeans and carrying his tool bag, on his way to his shift at the roadside motel. He froze when his eyes met the tall man standing at the curb. The cold steel of the handcuffs closed around his wrists. There was no resistance, no shouting, just a blankness in Reyes's eyes, as though he'd known all along this day would come. In Glendale, Jennifer and David were notified at the same time. Delgado called them from the office, his voice low but firm. Neither of them spoke, only sat on the living room couch holding hands, staring up at Sophia's photo on the wall. A strange, fragile relief mixed with fear filled the stale air around them. The next day, Reyes was brought back to Los Angeles. In the interrogation room, he stayed silent for the first hour. When the thick file, the maps, and the photo of the hair clip were laid in front of him, he lowered his head. His voice hoarse and slow, he began to talk. He said he never intended it, but that day, he'd seen her sitting alone, the driveway empty, and he stopped. It was just a passing thought, he said. But when she started screaming, he panicked and drove straight into the forest, keeping her hidden in the cabin. He recounted everything in grim detail, step by step. Delgado sat quietly, taking notes, showing no reaction. When the story was over, Reyes buried his face in his hands, mumbling something incoherent about the quiet of the woods. The interview ended. Delgado walked out, pulling off his gloves. He stood at the window for a long time without speaking. Part of his job was done, but he knew, for Jennifer and David, the pain would never truly end. That afternoon at a press conference, the district attorney confirmed to the media that suspect Anthony Reyes had been arrested and had confessed. A row of microphones bristled on the podium, questions flying. But the only clear answer appeared in bold red letters on the screen behind her. In custody. After confessing his crime in the interrogation room, Reyes sat silently, hands covering his face, motionless. When investigators asked about Sophia's body, he hesitated, then finally nodded. He agreed to lead the team to where he had buried her. The next morning, a quiet convoy of police vehicles left Los Angeles, heading north through the highway and into the depths of the Angeles forest. In the back of an SUV, Reyes sat with his head bowed, wrists cuffed, his face pale and hollow. On either side of the narrow road, the trees closed in, and the only sound was the crunch of tires on gravel and the faint hum of insects in the cold morning air. The convoy stopped at a small trailhead, the dirt here worn into deep ruts. Reyes was pulled from the car, his worn shoes sinking into the damp forest floor. He began to walk slowly, without speaking, leading the way into the woods. As they moved deeper, the sunlight thinned through the canopy. The air grew heavier, darker. After nearly 30 minutes, Reyes stopped at the base of a fallen tree, its trunk coated in moss. His trembling hand pointed to a patch of earth that at first seemed undisturbed. But to seasoned eyes, the subtle rise in the soil and its uneven color told the truth. The forensic team moved in immediately, marking the perimeter, stringing tape, and preparing their tools. Delgado stood quietly at the edge of the circle, his eyes fixed on the ground. The first layer of soil was carefully brushed away, revealing a faint pink scrap of fabric embedded in the mud. One of the techs crouched, gently clearing handfuls of dirt, peeling back the fabric to expose small bones tangled in roots. No one spoke. There were only the clicks of cameras, the scratch of pens on clipboards, and the heavy breathing of those standing nearby. When the final body bag was zipped and lifted onto a stretcher, Delgado finally lowered his head, his hands clenched at his sides, his eyes closed. In Glendale, as the vehicle carrying the remains made its way back to the city, Jennifer and David were already waiting at the station. They didn't need to ask. When Delgado walked in carrying the file, Jennifer buried her face in her hands, sobbing, while David sat still, his red eyes fixed blankly on the sterile white wall. Sophia had been found at last, but she would never come home again. The following day, police held a brief press conference, confirming that the remains recovered in the Angeles forest were those of 4-year-old Sophia Miller, missing since May 2016. A new word flashed across the screen behind the podium, bold and final. Recovered. But in her parents' hearts, that word felt like a final, cruel cut, closing the last fragile sliver of hope. Anthony Reyes was held in solitary confinement at the Los Angeles County Jail for 4 months while awaiting trial. Each day, he kept his eyes down, avoiding everyone's gaze, never asking for anything, never speaking. He was silent, as if he had long known his freedom was already gone. On the day the trial began, the courtroom was packed with journalists, local residents who had joined the search for Sophia, and those who had spent 2 years taping her pink smiling face to utility poles. Jennifer and David Miller sat in the front row. Jennifer wore a simple black dress, gripping a small notebook that held her daughter's photo. David sat with his head lowered, his hands trembling slightly. Reyes entered the courtroom in an orange jumpsuit, pale and gaunt. His eyes stayed on the floor. Not once did he look toward the Miller family. The room was silent except for the clicking of cameras and the quiet scratch of pens on paper. The prosecutor rose and laid out the sequence of events for the jury. Reyes had abducted Sophia from her own driveway, held her in the abandoned cabin for 2 days, killed her in panic, and buried her in the forest. He described Reyes as a calculating opportunist who planned every step to cover his crime. The room stayed hushed as the recording of Reyes's confession played. His raspy voice recounted how he had kept the little girl in the dark, how his hands had gripped too hard, too long, until her screams stopped. Jennifer bowed her head, her hands covering her face, her shoulders shaking. David sat rigid, his face like stone. The defense tried to paint Reyes as weak, confused, intellectually deficient, a man who didn't fully understand what he was doing. But the prosecutor pointed to the hair clip hidden under the floorboards, the evidence Reyes had kept secret for 2 years, and said, "This is not the act of someone confused. This is the act of someone who knew exactly what he'd done." When the closing arguments ended, the courtroom seemed to hold its breath. After 6 hours of deliberation, the jury filed back in. Guilty. Reyes was convicted of kidnapping, first-degree murder, and child assault. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As he was led away, his hollow eyes passed over Jennifer and David for just a moment. No remorse, no pain, only a cold, empty void. Outside the courthouse, the crowd dispersed quietly. Some of the volunteers who had once searched for Sophia stood silently, a few wiping away tears. Jennifer and David walked out side by side, saying nothing. Justice had been served, but justice would never bring Sophia home. After the trial ended, Jennifer and David Miller's lives did not return to normal. Justice had been served, but no justice could ever bring Sophia back. They decided to leave Glendale. The house on Sycamore Avenue, once filled with their daughter's laughter, had become nothing more than cold white walls, faded chalk marks on the driveway, and a silence neither of them could bear. Jennifer sold the house, packed their memories into cardboard boxes, and moved with David to a small coastal town near Santa Barbara. The new house was smaller, older, but it faced the sea. Every morning they sat quietly on a wooden bench outside, listening to the waves. Neither spoke much, but the sound of the ocean at least filled some of the emptiness that had followed them for 2 long years. In the town's central park, they dedicated a memorial bench, made of dark wood with a small brass plaque, "In loving memory of Sophia Miller. May her light remind us to cherish every moment." The bench faced a playground. Every afternoon they sat there, watching other children run and laugh, their laughter carrying in the salty wind. Sometimes Jennifer closed her eyes and imagined Sophia among them, her blonde hair flying. But when she opened her eyes, the playground was empty of her. The case of Sophia Miller became part of Los Angeles history, a painful reminder of how evil can tear through even the most ordinary lives, and how a small, forgotten clue, left in an unexpected place, could reignite an investigation thought long dead. A year after the trial ended, the abandoned restroom where Sophia's clothes were found was demolished. The The concrete was broken up and carted away, and the forest slowly reclaimed the space. Moss and ferns grew over the spot where the clogged toilet once stood, erasing everything, as though nothing had ever happened there. But in Jennifer and David's hearts, the memory of Sophia did not fade, and every laugh that rang out from the playground, every wave that broke on the rocks, reminded them that some part of her still existed in the innocence that never truly dies, even when they could no longer see it. 2 years, 8 months, and 12 days after Sophia Miller disappeared, her case was officially closed. Anthony Reyes's name was stamped in red on the file, marking him as a convicted criminal, sentenced to life. But for Jennifer and David, nothing truly closed. Their lives moved forward slowly, day by day. Sometimes Jennifer still woke in the middle of the night, convinced she heard her daughter's footsteps running down the hall. Sometimes David stood before a family photo, taken in the park, staring at it for hours, caught somewhere between the past and the present. They learned how to exist with the loss. They learned to accept what couldn't be forgotten, and to find a fragile kind of peace among the salt air, the ocean waves, and the sound of other children laughing on the playground. Each year, on May 13th, they returned to the wooden bench in the park, carrying a small bouquet of flowers. Jennifer laid the flowers down, sat quietly, her hand resting on the cool brass plaque. The inscription was still there, unchanging. In loving memory of Sophia Miller, may her light remind us to cherish every moment. A breeze swept through. On the playground, children ran back and forth, their laughter bright and innocent. For Jennifer and David, justice had been done. The killer was behind bars. The case was solved. But the silence Sophia left behind, the silence of a child no longer there, would stay with them forever. On that bench, as the sunset painted the shoreline orange, Jennifer closed her eyes for a moment and imagined her daughter sitting right next to them, smiling at them one last time. And then, softly, just loud enough for herself to hear, she said, "We never stopped looking. And we never will."